Hello, my name is Dominic Larson, 33 years old. I live in Minneapolis, the city of shimmering lakes and snow-covered streets every winter. I am the chief financial officer of an automotive parts manufacturing company, a company founded by my grandfather, inherited by my father, and now a place I'm struggling to keep from collapsing. My story doesn't begin with numbers, balance sheets, or tense boardroom meetings. It begins in a large, cold house where I grew up, a place where I was always the outsider, the scapegoat for every mistake that wasn't mine. I'm sitting here in my small apartment, looking out the window where light rain patters on the surface of Lake Calhoun. Tonight I can't sleep, perhaps because memories are flooding back, like waves that never stop crashing against the shore. I hold a cold cup of coffee, trying to piece together the fragments of my life, from the days when I was just a shy boy, always bowing my head under the weight of my family's reprimands. My family lived in an affluent neighborhood in Edina, a suburb of Minneapolis. It was a 3-story mansion with pristine white walls, towering windows, and a meticulously tended garden maintained by hired help. But inside, it wasn't as warm as it appeared. My father, Harold Larson, was a stern man with piercing eyes and a voice that carried an air of authority. He was the chairman of Larson Automotive, the largest automotive parts manufacturing company in Minnesota. He inherited it from my grandfather, a man I only knew through stories, a tough but fair man, vastly different from my father. My mother, Margaret, was a gentlewoman, but her gentleness was always overshadowed by her fear of displeasing my father. She loved me, I knew that, but her love often came in fleeting hugs or weak words of comfort after I was scolded by my father. "Dominic, don't be sad. Your father only wants what's best for the family," she'd say. But deep down, I knew she didn't believe her own words. And then there was Gabriel, my younger brother, 2 years my junior. Gabriel was the son of our family, handsome, energetic, sharp-tongued, and always able to make people laugh. From a young age, he was the center of attention. When Gabriel walked into a room, the world seemed to light up. And me? I was the faint shadow standing behind him, silent and unnoticed. I didn't resent Gabriel, at least not at first. When we were young, we were close. I remember summer afternoons when we'd sneak into the backyard, playing adventure games with tree branches as swords. Gabriel always wanted to be the knight, and I, naturally, was his squire. But as we grew older, things changed. Gabriel realized he could escape trouble by blaming me, and our family, especially our parents, was always ready to believe him. I still remember the first time I realized I was the scapegoat. I was 10. Gabriel was 8. He was being mischievous and broke an expensive antique vase that my mother cherished. When she asked what happened, Gabriel pointed at me, his eyes brimming with tears, saying I'd chased him and knocked over the vase. I stood there, mouth agape, unable to utter a word in my defense. My mother looked at me, her eyes full of disappointment. "Dominic, why are you always so careless?" she said, then turned to hug Gabriel, comforting him as if he were the one hurt. When my father found out, he grounded me for a week. I sat in my room, staring out the window, feeling a nameless resentment swelling in my chest. But I didn't cry. I don't know why, but I learned to swallow my pain early on. Incidents like that kept repeating year after year. When Gabriel wrecked the family's first car at 15, he claimed I'd driven it recklessly and damaged the engine. My father believed him without even asking me. He berated me in front of the whole family, calling me irresponsible and an embarrassment to the family. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to stay calm. I wanted to scream that I didn't even have a driver's license, that I hadn't touched the car, but I didn't. I was afraid of making things worse, afraid of my father's anger, afraid of seeing that disappointed look in my mother's eyes again. I grew up in silence. I learned to avoid arguments, to bow my head and take the blame, even when it wasn't mine. I became shy, withdrawn, always striving to do everything perfectly so no one could find fault with me. I studied hard, earned high grades in school, but those achievements were never noticed. When I brought home a report card full of A's, my father would glance at it and say, "Good, but don't get complacent." Meanwhile, if Gabriel managed a C, the whole family threw a celebration. "He has a knack for business, he doesn't need to study too much," my father would say, his eyes beaming with pride as he looked at Gabriel. I wasn't jealous of Gabriel, honestly. I just wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged, even once. But that never happened. My mother sometimes tried to make up for it by buying me small gifts, like a book or a sweater. But those gifts couldn't fill the void in my heart. I felt like an invisible person in my own home. When I went to college, I chose to major in finance, partly because I loved numbers. They were logical, clear, and didn't judge, and partly because I hoped one day I could prove my worth to my family. I studied at the University of Minnesota, not far from home, but I deliberately lived in the dorms to avoid returning home too often. Those college years were the freest time of my life. I had good friends who knew nothing about my family, who didn't compare me to Gabriel. They liked me for who I was, a kind, hard-working Dominic, always ready to help. I graduated with honors, top of the finance department. On graduation day, I nervously invited my parents to the ceremony. I thought this time they'd be proud of me. But my father was busy with a meeting and my mother had to take Gabriel to meet a business partner. Only my Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother, showed up. He patted my shoulder, smiling brightly. "You did great, Dominic. Your grandfather would be so proud." His words were the only light in that day, but they also made me realize my family would never change. After graduation, I received a job offer from a major financial firm in Chicago. It was a chance to start a new life, to step out from my family's shadow. But then my father called me back, saying the family company needed me. "Dominic, you're good with finance. Come help me, this is our family's legacy," he said, his voice full of authority. I hesitated. I knew returning home meant stepping back into the old cycle, but a part of me still craved my parents' approval. I wanted to prove I was valuable, that I wasn't the useless person they thought I was. So I turned down the Chicago offer and returned to Minneapolis to become the chief financial officer of Larson Automotive. I joined the company hoping this time things would be different, but I was wrong. The old cycle didn't just return, it pulled me in deeper with conflicts, blame, and pain I couldn't have foreseen. I still remember my first day stepping into the Larson Automotive office, my heart pounding like a schoolboy about to give a presentation in front of the class. The company's headquarters stood in downtown Minneapolis, a gleaming structure of glass and steel shimmering under the sunlight, with the Larson logo prominently etched above the entrance. I wore a new suit, my tie knotted so tightly it made breathing slightly difficult, and carried a briefcase filled with ideas I'd prepared for weeks. I had studied every financial report from the past 3 years, analyzed every figure, period, every line of expenditure, and devised a plan to improve operational efficiency. I wanted to prove I wasn't just Dominic, the clumsy eldest son, as my family often thought. I wanted them to see me, truly see me. But the moment I walked through the glass doors, I felt that familiar chill. My father, Harold, was seated in the large conference room, surrounded by long-serving executives, middle-aged men with sharp eyes and forced smiles. "Dominic, you're here," my father said, his voice dry, devoid of warmth. "Sit down. We're discussing the expansion plan for the Michigan plant." I nodded, forcing a smile, but no one in the room looked at me for more than a second. I felt like an uninvited guest, even though this was my family's company. In those early days, I threw myself into work like a soldier on the battlefield. I reviewed the company's entire financial system, uncovering unnecessary expenses, overpriced supplier contracts, and gaps in the auditing process. I worked late into the night, often the last to leave the office, with fluorescent lights illuminating the dancing numbers on my computer screen. After 3 months, I proposed a financial restructuring plan, cutting 15% of operating costs by renegotiating supplier contracts, optimizing production processes, and investing in modern management software. I presented the plan at a board meeting, my voice trembling but resolute. If we do this, the company could save millions of dollars annually, I concluded, scanning the table, hoping for a nod, a word of praise, or anything. But my father crossed his arms, frowning. Dominic, you're too cautious. This company needs bold moves, not petty numbers. The other executives nodded, some chuckling. My face burned as if I'd been slapped in front of everyone. But father, these numbers aren't petty, I tried to argue, my voice faltering. We can stabilize cash flow and reduce long-term risks. My father waved his hand dismissively. Let Gabriel handle the big picture, just do your part well. And with that, the meeting ended, my plan cast aside like a discarded draft. Months passed, and when I was 28, Gabriel, my younger brother, with his radiant smile and confident demeanor, was appointed CEO by our father. He was only 26 with no significant contributions to the company. More accurately, he had caused losses in several projects he spearheaded. But Gabriel believed our father had a vision and the charisma the company needed. I don't deny Gabriel's charisma, but I can't deny that Gabriel had charisma. He could command a room's attention when talking about grand ideas like expanding production internationally or investing in new technology. The problem was that Gabriel's ideas often lacked practicality. Once he proposed building a new factory in China without a concrete financial plan. Another time, he signed a contract with a partner without thoroughly vetting their credit history, costing the company nearly $5 million. And whenever his decisions failed, somehow the blame always fell on me. Once Gabriel signed a major contract with a distributor in California without consulting me. The contract required the company to advance millions of dollars, but the distributor failed to deliver on time, causing heavy losses. In the next meeting, Gabriel stood up, pointing at me in front of the board. Dominic, you're the CFO. Why didn't you catch this issue early on? I was stunned, unable to believe my ears. Gabriel, you never sent me that contract to review, I replied, trying to stay calm. But father cut in. Dominic, don't shift blame. You need to be more proactive. The other executives looked at me, their eyes full of skepticism. I felt like I'd been pushed into a deep pit with no way out. Incidents like these kept happening. I worked tirelessly, fixing Gabriel's mistakes, patching up the financial holes he left behind. I'd improved cash flow, ensured timely debt payments, and even successfully negotiated with the bank to lower interest rates on our loans I had taken out. But nobody acknowledged my efforts. My father called my contributions obvious work, as if anyone could have done it. Gabriel constantly belittled me, calling me a paper pusher at company events. Overwhelmed by pressure, I confided in my mother about my struggles at the company, hoping she'd understand and empathize with me. But she only sighed and said, "Dear son, try to get along with my father." She said, "Family is the most important thing." I began to feel like I was sinking into a quagmire. Each day I went to work. I walked into the office with a heavy weight in my chest. I wanted to scream, to tell everyone that I wasn't the incompetent person they thought I was. But I couldn't. My shyness and fear of making things worse held me back. I started therapy, a decision I'd hesitated over for a long time. Dr. Ellen, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes, was the first person who truly listened to me. "You need to learn to set boundaries, Dominic," she said during one session. "You can't keep letting your family define your worth." I nodded, but I knew deep down it was harder than she thought. Setting boundaries with my family. To me, it felt like climbing a brick wall with bare hands. Even so, I tried. I started voicing ideas during meetings. My opinions began to be heard in meetings, though my voice still trembled and my heart raced whenever my father frowned. I proposed small changes, like improving the financial reporting system or training staff on cost management. A few colleagues started noticing me, especially Sarah, the head of accounting. She was a smart, straightforward woman who wasn't afraid to debate numbers with me, but also didn't hesitate to praise me when I did well. "You're really good at this, Dominic," she said once, when I caught a major error in a report. That small compliment, though minor, was a rare ray of light in my gloomy days. But those rays weren't enough to dispel the darkness. My father grew harsher. During one meeting, when I presented the financial risks of one of Gabriel's risky projects, he interrupted me. "You're always worrying too much, Dominic," he said. "If you had half of Gabriel's boldness, this company would be much further along." Those words cut like a knife. I sat down, my throat tightening. Gabriel, sitting across from me, smirked. I knew he was relishing the moment. The pain grew, but I didn't give up. I told myself that if I kept trying, if I could prove my worth, one day my father would see me differently. My mother would smile at me, not with pity. Gabriel would stop using me as a punching bag for his frustrations. I clung to that hope, though it grew increasingly fragile. But then one day, everything changed. It was a crisp October morning when the air in Minneapolis turned biting cold, and golden leaves drifted across the streets on my way to the office. I walked into the company as usual, clutching a steaming cup of coffee and a long to-do list. But that day, the atmosphere in the office was different. Employees whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with unease. Sarah, the head of accounting, pulled me aside. "Dominic, have you heard?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "The company's stock price is plummeting. Investors are starting to pull out." I frowned, feeling my heart pound. "What's going on?" Sarah shook her head. "I'm not sure, but there's a rumor that the deal with the Chinese partner fell through. Another one of Gabriel's ideas." I rushed to my computer and checked the stock market. Larson Automotive's share price had dropped 20% in just a few hours. The news spread like wildfire. Major investors called incessantly, demanding to speak with my father or Gabriel. Employees were panicking, unsure if the company would survive. I dove into analysis, trying to uncover the cause. And then I found the truth. Gabriel had bet heavily on a factory expansion project in China, but the partner there lacked the capacity to deliver. The company had poured tens of millions of dollars into it, but the project was stalled, and we had no way to recover the funds. I hurried to the conference room where my father and Gabriel were seated with a few other executives. The tension in the room was palpable, taut like a stretched wire. My father slammed his hand on the table, his face flushed with anger. "Who's responsible for this?" he roared. Gabriel, maintaining an astonishing calm, shrugged. "Father, I did everything I could. But if Dominic had managed the finances better, we wouldn't be in this mess." I froze, unable to believe my ears. "Gabriel, you know I warned you about this project," I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. "I told you the partner wasn't reliable, but you didn't listen." Gabriel smirked. "You're always so pessimistic, Dominic. If you hadn't held back the budget, we could have sped up progress and avoided this." My father turned to me, his eyes sharp as knives. "Dominic, you're the CFO. This is your responsibility." I wanted to scream that I'd done everything I could, that I'd warned them for months, that I wasn't the one who made the bad call. But I stood there, fists clenched, feeling resentment surge in my chest. Once again, I was the scapegoat. The weeks that followed were hell. The stock price continued to plummet, hitting an all-time low. The bank tightened our loans, demanding early repayments. The company's largest investor, a New York-based fund, announced they were pulling out entirely. Employees started quitting, fearing bankruptcy. I worked day and night, negotiating with the bank, finding ways to cut costs and keeping the cash flow from drying up. But no matter how hard I tried, everything slipped through my fingers. My father and Gabriel, instead of cooperating, only pointed fingers. In every meeting, I was criticized, labeled incompetent and lacking vision. I felt like a small boat in a raging ocean storm with no one offering a hand to help. Then one day, my father summoned me to his private office. He sat behind his desk, looking exhausted, but his eyes remained icy. Gabriel stood beside him, arms crossed, a faint smile on his lips. "Dominic," my father said, his voice low but commanding, "we need you to do something." Something important to save the company. I nodded, ready to listen. I thought finally they wanted my input, perhaps a restructuring plan. But as my father continued, I felt the blood drain from my body. "We need you to adjust the accounting books," he said, emphasizing each word. "Inflate the profits, make the financial reports look better, just enough to attract a new investor." I blinked, unable to believe my ears. "Father, do you mean falsify the books?" I asked, my voice trembling. Gabriel cut in, his tone mocking. "Don't act so innocent, Dominic. This is the only way to save the company. Or do you want us to go bankrupt and the family to lose everything?" I looked at my father, hoping he'd say it was just a fleeting idea, that he wasn't serious. But he only nodded. "Dominic, this is your duty to the family. You can do it, right?" The room felt like it was spinning. Falsifying the books wasn't just illegal. It went against every value I held dear. I'd spent my life trying to do the right thing, even when it cost me. I wouldn't become a fraud just to please my father and Gabriel. "Father," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "we can't do this. It's not just illegal. It would put the company at even greater risk. If we're caught, we'll lose everything." Gabriel scoffed. "Listen to him, always scared. You're pathetic, Dominic." My father crossed his arms, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Dominic, you don't understand how real business works. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to survive." I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff. Part of me wanted to agree to do what my father asked just to finally earn his approval. But the larger part, the honest part of me, screamed that I couldn't do this. "I have another idea," I said, my voice slightly shaky but resolute. "We can restructure. Cut costs, sell off non-essential assets, and find a strategic partner. I've been working with the bank. They're willing to extend our loans if we present a viable plan." My father waved his hand as if my idea wasn't worth hearing. "Theory, Dominic. It's all just theory. You don't have what it takes to lead this company." Gabriel nodded, smirking. "Exactly. You should stick to what you're good at, like staring at spreadsheets, and leave the big decisions to us." A surge of anger flared within me, but I held it back. I knew arguing now was pointless. "I can't falsify the books," I said, my voice firmer than ever. "I'll prepare a restructuring plan and present it next week." My father looked at me, his eyes brimming with disappointment. "You're letting the family down, Dominic," he said, then gestured for me to leave. I walked out of the office, my legs heavy as lead. A mix of relief and fear washed over me. For the first time, I'd said no to my father, stood up for what I believed in. But I knew this decision would come at a cost. Gabriel wouldn't forgive me. My father would think even less of me. And the company, if not saved in time, would collapse. The days that followed were a frenzy. I drafted a restructuring plan, working with Sarah and the accounting team to crunch every number. I reached out to potential partners, persuading them to invest in Larson Automotive if we overhauled our management practices. I presented the plan at a board meeting, my voice steady for the first time, though my heart still raced. "This is our chance to save the company legally and sustainably," I concluded, scanning the table, hoping for support. But my father shook his head. "Dominic, you don't understand what real business is." Gabriel sneered. "He thinks he's a hero, but he's just dragging us into the abyss." The other executives remained silent, their eyes skeptical. My plan was dismissed like so many times before. My father and Gabriel decided to sell off shares at a steep discount to cover the debt, a move that sent the stock price spiraling further. I sat in my office, staring at the computer screen displaying a glaring red chart, feeling like all my efforts were futile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my small apartment, gazing out at Lake Calhoun where the water shimmered under the moonlight. I thought about my father, Gabriel, and the company, the legacy my grandfather built that I didn't want to lose. I thought about Dr. Ellen, who told me I needed to set boundaries. But how when the whole world seemed against me? Then I remembered Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother. He was the only family member who ever truly understood me. He'd left the company years ago, started his own small business, and lived a modest but happy life. I picked up the phone and dialed his number even though it was nearly midnight. Uncle Thomas answered after the second ring, his voice warm and full of concern, as if he'd been expecting my call for a long time. "Dominic, are you okay? It's late." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the urge to break down. "I'm not okay, Uncle," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Everything at the company is falling apart, and Father and Gabriel, they want me to do something I can't." I poured out everything. About the financial crisis, the demand to falsify the books, my rejected restructuring plan, and the feeling of being trapped in my own family. Uncle listened without interrupting, occasionally letting out a soft to let me know he was still there. When I finished, we sat in silence for a moment. I could hear the wind whistling through the phone. Uncle must have been standing on his porch, as he often did when he needed to think. "Dominic," he finally said, "you did the right thing by refusing to cook the books. That's not your grandfather's way, and it's not your way either." His words felt like a cool breeze, soothing the storm raging inside me. "But Uncle," I said, "I don't know what to do next. The company is dying, and I can't just stand by and watch." "Then don't stand by," he replied, his voice suddenly sharp. "Take action. You have a plan, don't you? That restructuring plan. Is it feasible?" I hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Yes, I believe it would work, but Father and Gabriel won't listen to me." Uncle chuckled softly, a sound both warm and sly. "Then we'll make them listen, Dominic. Or better yet, we'll take matters into our own hands." I sat up straight, a tiny spark of hope flickering within me. "What do you mean?" Uncle Thomas began to explain, his voice brimming with excitement. He talked about how the company's stock price was at an all-time low, a rare opportunity to buy back control. "Harold and Gabriel are dumping shares to pay off debt, but that's a mistake. If we acquire enough shares, we can take control and implement your plan. This is how we save Larson Automotive, and it's how you prove your worth." His idea left me reeling. Buy back shares? Confront Father and Gabriel head-on? It sounded like a reckless gamble, something the shy Dominic of the past would never have dared to consider. But now I was no longer the boy who bowed his head and took the blame. I was tired of being underestimated, tired of living in my family's shadow. "I want to do it," I said, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. "But how much money do we need? And how do we do this without being found out?" Uncle Thomas laughed heartily. "That's the Dominic I know. Leave the funding to me. You focus on the plan and keep it quiet. We'll do this, but we have to be careful." That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my computer, starting to calculate. Larson Automotive's stock price had plummeted to its lowest point ever, around $10 per share compared to $50 a few years ago. If we could acquire 38% of the shares, we'd have significant influence on the board, enough to change the company's direction. But to do that, we'd need tens of millions of dollars, a sum I, with my CFO salary, couldn't even dream of. The next morning, I met Uncle Thomas at a small coffee shop in the suburbs, a place where no one from the company or family would spot us. He wore an old sweater, his hair flecked with gray, but his eyes blazed like a warrior ready for battle. "I've spoken to a friend at the bank," he said, sliding a coffee toward me. "They're willing to loan us the money, but we'll need to put up personal assets as collateral. I'll use my company as security. What about you, Dominic? Are you willing to take the risk?" I swallowed hard, thinking of my small apartment, my modest savings, and the tiny shareholding I had in the company. If this plan failed, I'd lose everything. But if I did nothing, the company, my grandfather's legacy, would collapse, and I'd live with regret forever. "I'm in," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. Uncle clapped me on the shoulder, his smile radiant. "Good job, Dominic. This is the first time I've seen you truly stand up for yourself." We began working like conspirators in the shadows. Uncle Thomas contacted a law firm to ensure all transactions were legal and discreet. As CFO, I had access to the company's internal information, which helped us pinpoint the best times to buy shares. By day, I went through the motions at the office, pretending nothing had changed, while secretly coordinating with Uncle Thomas through encrypted emails and late-night calls. Sarah, the only person I trusted at the company, noticed I was more stressed than usual. "Dominic, are you okay?" she asked one day, catching me staring at my computer screen at midnight. I forced a smile. "Just a lot of work, Sarah." I wanted to tell her, but I knew the fewer people who knew, the safer the plan would be. Meanwhile, Father and Gabriel continued dumping shares, driving the price even lower. Other investors, seeing the company's downward spiral, followed suit. Each time a block of shares hit the market, Uncle Thomas and I, through a shell company, quietly bought them up. We moved carefully, leaving no trail that could lead back to us. But every transaction made my heart race, as if I were walking a tightrope between two skyscrapers. I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if Father found out. He'd call me a traitor. Mother would cry. Gabriel would sneer and call me a coward who dared to play big. But there was no turning back. During those days, I wrestled fiercely with myself. I wasn't someone who thrived on confrontation. My shyness, my fear of disappointing my family, clung to me like a shadow. Some nights I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Am I trying to save the company, or am I just getting back at Father and Gabriel? I asked myself. But then I thought of my grandfather who, as Uncle Thomas had told me, always put integrity first. He'd built Larson Automotive from nothing, not through deceit, but through hard work and honesty. I couldn't let his legacy die in Father and Gabriel's hands. Uncle Thomas was my greatest support. We met weekly, sometimes at his house, a cozy little home in the suburbs where he'd lived alone since his wife passed away a few years ago. During our talks, he shared stories of his youth, when he too was belittled by my father, his older brother. "Harold always thought he was the smartest in the family," Uncle said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "But your grandfather taught me that leadership isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." His words gave me strength. Uncle wasn't just an ally. He was a reminder that I wasn't alone. After 3 months of working in secret, we made a major breakthrough. We owned 38% of Larson Automotive's shares. It was a significant stake, enough to wield considerable influence on the board. But I knew that to truly change the company, we needed to convince other shareholders, those who'd lost faith in Father and Gabriel. I began preparing a detailed plan, building on my original restructuring idea. I worked day and night with Sarah and a few trusted colleagues to refine every detail. The plan included cost-cutting, selling off non-essential assets, and finding a strategic partner to inject fresh capital. I knew that if presented correctly, this plan could save the company. With 38% of the shares in our possession, Uncle Thomas and I decided to call for an emergency shareholders meeting at Larson Automotive. We operated under the cover of a shell company called North Star Holdings, run by an old friend of Uncle Thomas in Chicago, to acquire shares from panicked sellers, including Father and Gabriel. This ensured our plan to amass shares went smoothly, leaving no trace until we were ready to reveal ourselves. Every transaction felt like a step on thin ice, my heart pounding each time North Star Holdings acquired another block of shares. We knew that if we were discovered too soon, everything would collapse before we could act. On the day of the emergency shareholders meeting, I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment, adjusting my tie, trying to hide my trembling hands. The navy blue suit I wore was the same one I'd worn on my first day at Larson Automotive. A day filled with hope that I could change how my family saw me. Now that illusion was gone. Today I wasn't there to please anyone. I was there to save the company and to save myself. Uncle Thomas met me in the company building's lobby, his eyes gleaming with a resolve I'd never had. He wore a simple suit, his silver-flecked hair neatly combed, but his confidence radiated, making me feel like I had a seasoned soldier by my side. "You ready, Dominic?" he asked, placing a hand on my shoulder, a touch both warm and empowering. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "I'm not sure, Uncle," I admitted, my voice slightly shaky. "But I know I have to do this." He smiled, a warm but determined smile. "You don't need to be sure. You just need to believe in yourself. I'm here with you." We walked into the large conference room where shareholders were already gathering. The atmosphere was tense, like the calm before a storm, as if the entire room was holding its breath for an explosion. Familiar faces filled the space. Longtime executives with cold, sharp eyes, representatives from investment funds with anxious expressions, and a few curious smaller shareholders looking around. My father, Harold, sat at the head of the table, his face stern, his eyes cutting like knives. Gabriel stood beside him, arms crossed, his usual faint smile on his lips, but I noticed a hint of unease in the way he shifted his weight, as if he sensed something was amiss. When Father saw Uncle Thomas enter with me, his eyebrows shot up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Thomas," he said, his voice low but laced with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Gabriel turned, his faint smile twisting into a sneer. "Dominic, what's this? You brought Uncle to convince everyone you're not a failure?" Gabriel's words cut like a knife, but I stayed silent, refusing to let my emotions take over. Father looked at me, then at Uncle Thomas, his eyes narrowing. "This is a shareholders' meeting, not a family reunion," he said coldly. "If you're here to support Dominic, you're wasting your time." Anger surged in my chest, but Uncle Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. He smiled, a calm but calculated smile. "Harold, I'm not just here to support Dominic," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I'm here as a shareholder, and I have a right to be at this meeting." The room fell silent, as if no one dared to breathe. Father stiffened, his gaze shifting from Uncle Thomas to me as if trying to piece together a puzzle. Gabriel let out a laugh, but it was hollow, unnatural. "Shareholder? Uncle, you left the company years ago. You don't have any stake here." Uncle Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase and placed them on the table with an air of authority. "Dominic and I, through North Star Holdings, own 38% of Larson Automotive's shares," he declared, his voice resonating through the room. "We are the ones who called for this meeting to discuss the company's future." The room erupted in murmurs. Father stood abruptly, his face flushed, his fists clenched. "North Star Holdings? Thomas, you're behind this? And Dominic, you're part of it? You dare scheme behind my back?" Gabriel stepped forward, pointing at my face, his eyes blazing with anger. "Who do you think you are, Dominic? A coward like you dares to play this game?" My heart pounded, but this time I didn't bow my head. "Gabriel," I said, meeting his gaze, my voice trembling but firm, "I'm not scheming. I'm trying to save the company. Grandfather's legacy, but to do that, we need change." Father slammed the table, his voice nearly a shout. "Change? You call betraying your family change? You and Thomas are trying to steal the company." I felt suffocated, but Uncle Thomas signaled for me to continue. I stood, clutching the restructuring plan that Sarah and I had worked on tirelessly. "Dear shareholders," I began, my voice shaky for the first few seconds, but as I spoke, I felt confidence rising from deep within. "Larson Automotive is on the brink of bankruptcy. Our stock price has dropped over 80% in just a few months. Investors are pulling out. The bank is tightening our loans, but I believe the company can be saved if we act now." I laid out my plan step by step. I spoke about cutting costs, selling off non-essential assets like the old Ohio factory, and negotiating with a strategic partner in Germany I'd been in contact with. A company willing to invest if we could prove our ability to recover. I presented specific figures, charts Sarah had helped me prepare, and analyses showing that if executed correctly, the company could return to growth within 2 years. I spoke with complete sincerity, not hiding the company's dire situation, but also not letting go of hope. When I finished, the room fell silent for a moment. A few shareholders nodded, their eyes reflecting cautious approval. But Father wouldn't let it go. He stood, his voice icy. "Dominic, what are you doing? You think you can stand here, defy me and your brother, and steal the company?" The word steal stabbed at my chest. "Father," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I'm not trying to steal anything. I'm trying to save the company, grandfather's legacy, but to do that, we need change. You and Gabriel have made decisions that brought us to this point. I can't stand by and watch anymore." Gabriel jumped in, his voice dripping with anger. "You're a coward, Dominic. You think you're smarter than all of us? You're just a number cruncher who's never dared to take a risk." His words stung like needles, but this time I didn't back down. "Gabriel," I said, looking him in the eye, "taking risks doesn't mean being reckless. I tried to warn you about the failed projects, but you didn't listen. Now we're paying the price for those mistakes." The room fell silent again, but this time I sensed a shift. Some shareholders began whispering, their skeptical looks giving way to consideration. Uncle Thomas stood, his voice calm but commanding. "We propose removing Harold Larson as chairman of the board and Gabriel Larson as CEO. I nominate myself as interim chairman and Dominic as CEO. We are committed to implementing this restructuring plan to put Larson Automotive back on track." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Father slammed the table, his face red with fury. "This is betrayal. Dominic, you're destroying the family." My heart tightened. "Father," I said, my voice choked, "I'm doing this for the company, for grandfather's legacy, and for the employees who trust us. I don't want to destroy the family, but I can't let the company collapse." Gabriel stepped forward, pointing at my face. "You'll regret this, Dominic. You think you can run the company? You'll fail, and when you do, don't expect the family to forgive you." I met his gaze, seeing his anger, but also a flicker of fear. For the first time, Gabriel knew he'd lost control, and I wasn't the one backing down. The vote took place immediately after. I sat there, my heart pounding, clutching the plan like a lifeline. Shareholders raised their hands one by one. Some supported Father and Gabriel, but the majority, those who'd lost faith in their leadership, sided with us. When the results were announced, I could hardly believe my ears. 62% of shareholders voted to remove Father and Gabriel. Uncle Thomas was elected interim chairman, and I, Dominic Larson, once called useless, one became CEO. Father stood, his eyes filled with pain and anger. "You'll pay for this, Dominic," he said, then stormed out of the room without looking back. Gabriel followed, but before leaving, he paused, giving me a bitter smile. "Congratulations, big brother, but you'll soon realize you're not up to it." The conference room door slammed shut, and I felt like the world had just collapsed beneath my feet. The conference room suddenly felt stifling, despite the scattered whispers and hesitant applause from the shareholders. Uncle Thomas placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice warm and steady. "You did well, Dominic," but I didn't feel victorious. My heart was heavy, as if I'd just lost something irreplaceable. I had gained control of Larson Automotive, but at the cost of an irreparable rift with my father and Gabriel. When I returned to my apartment that night, a message from my mother lit up my phone screen. "Dominic, how could you do this to your father and brother? You're tearing the family apart." I read it over and over, tears streaming down my cheeks. I wanted to call her, to explain that I was only trying to save the company, to preserve my grandfather's legacy, but I knew she wouldn't listen. Not now. In the days that followed, I stepped into the role of CEO with a mix of determination and fear. Gabriel's old office was now mine, but I felt uneasy sitting behind the massive desk. Each morning I entered the company, sensing the employees' gazes, some curious, some skeptical, and some, like Sarah, quietly trusting. "You've got this, Dominic," Sarah said during a team meeting when I presented the restructuring plan. "We believe in you." Her encouragement was a ray of light, but the weight of pressure on my shoulders didn't ease. I began implementing the restructuring plan immediately. First, I worked with the bank to renegotiate our debt, convincing them to extend repayment terms by presenting my detailed plan. They agreed, but only if the company met financial milestones within the next 6 months. Next, I sold the old Ohio factory, a non-profitable asset, and used the proceeds to pay down debt. I also negotiated with the German partner I'd previously contacted. They were impressed by my transparency and agreed to invest a significant sum in exchange for a minority stake and a long-term partnership. Every step was a challenge, but I worked relentlessly, often staying in the office until midnight, reviewing every figure, every contract. Slowly, the company began to recover. The stock price crept upward, albeit gradually. Employees, initially anxious, grew more confident as they saw me follow through on my promises. Sarah became my right hand, helping manage the accounting team and keeping everything on track. Uncle Thomas, as interim chairman, was an indispensable mentor. During our private meetings, he always reminded me, "You don't need to be perfect, Dominic. You just need to do what's right." But while the company stabilized, my family did not. Father and Gabriel cut off all contact. I heard Father had retreated to a vacation home in the suburbs, avoiding everyone. Gabriel, according to Sarah, had started working for a rival company, spreading rumors that I had stolen the company from the family. Mother still reached out, but every call was filled with reproach. "You've broken your father's heart, Dominic," she said during one call, her voice choked with emotion. "Why couldn't you get along with Gabriel?" I tried to explain, but each time I heard her voice, I felt like that 10-year-old boy again, standing silently, taking blame for a broken vase that wasn't my fault. The pain drove me back to Dr. Ellen, my therapist. In our sessions, I poured out my guilt and fear that I'd destroyed my family. Ellen listened, then said, "Dominic, you can't control how your family reacts, but you can control how you live with yourself. You chose the path of integrity, that's what matters." She encouraged me to learn forgiveness, not for Father or Gabriel, but for myself. "You did the best you could," she said. "Now let yourself live." Ellen's words gradually sank in. I reconnected with old college friends, people who valued me for being myself, not Dominic of the Larson family. We gathered on weekends, shared dinners, and laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Uncle Thomas became my greatest emotional anchor. One evening at his home in St. Paul, he poured me a glass of wine and said, "Dominic, you're more like your grandfather than you realize. He too had to fight for what he believed in." His words made me smile, though my eyes stung. Over time, I learned to set boundaries with my family. I stopped waiting for Father's or Gabriel's approval, stopped hoping Mother would understand. I accepted that they might never change, and that was okay. I didn't need them to know my worth. The company continued to recover, and I found joy in leading. Not to prove anything, but because I genuinely believed in my grandfather's legacy. And that is the story of my life, from a shy boy who endured in the shadow of his family to Dominic Larson. A steadfast leader living true to his values, finding peace in a journey of healing and rebuilding my grandfather's legacy. If you ask me for advice, I'd say, listen to the voice inside you, no matter how small it seems. Don't let others define your worth, and don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in. The path may be lonely and challenging, but when you live authentically, you'll find the strength to overcome anything. I wish you the courage to face your own storms, to walk the path you choose with an open heart and unwavering belief. Live a life you can be proud of, as I'm learning to do every day.